All right.
Should we get it going?
Here we go.
Let's do it.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. We just got the green light to move ahead. We appreciate you being here. This is the Tech Track, Innovation, Cybersecurity Best Practices and Trends. Here with me, joining us for the panel discussion this morning, which I think will be very interesting. We don't have slides, but I don't think we're going to need them based on the conversation and some of the things that we're going to be talking about and learning. So joining me here to my right, John Pohlman. John is the Director of Information Security Services at Tanner. He's been in the information security, or been a consultant in that space for more than 10 years, has been in the e-commerce and IT space for many more before that. John leads Tanner's information security services practice and provides risk assessments to a myriad of different companies and industries. In the process of performing these risk assessments, John's developed a vast experience and knowledge, a huge library of stories that we're gonna lean on him on to share all the good, the bad, the ugly things to keep us entertained. To John's right is Brandon Greenwood. I would argue that you would hardly find a better, more equipped, or qualified Chief Information Security Officer than Brandon Greenwood. He's the CISO and VP of Security and Information Technology at Overstock.com. If you think about that organization, more than $2 billion in revenue, all of the different things that he has to handle to make sure that customer information is protected, credit card information is protected, various payment systems, as you can go on and on. So Brandon's been with Overstock for more than 20 years, since 2011, has been in the industry for more than 20 years, but 2011 joined Overstock, and has taken over security and compliance initiatives. One of the most sophisticated network security strategies in the state, I would argue, is employed by Overstock, and that's really at Brandon's at the helm of that. So lucky to have Brandon here with us to share his knowledge and experience as well. By introduction, my name is Regan Guth. I'm an Executive Vice President with Diversified Insurance. We sell a lot of cyber insurance. We work with a lot of tech companies, so we'll have some fun stories and things that we can talk about as well. My background or introduction to all things cyber started when I was in college. I worked for a .com down in Utah County, and so when I first started into the insurance industry in 2002, I was the youngest individual there by probably 15 or 20 years. And they said, hey, you worked at an internet company. You understand this internet stuff a little bit more. So tell us about cyber insurance. I'm like, cyber what? So that was my introduction to cyber insurance, and it's all been, I'll say, uphill from there. But we'll talk a lot about some of those resources later on. We want this to be a very interactive panel. We're going to talk about a few different things that we are hopeful, or our hope is that this will all be helpful, targeted to the CFO and the senior finance colleagues in your organizations, things that you might want to be aware of that you are either doing now, things that you can do later, takeaways from this conversation. If you have questions, please raise your hand. We have mics here that we'll pass around because we want to make sure that we capture that on the video for future on-demand viewing. But maybe let's talk about, just to kick it off, some responsibilities with CFOs. And maybe the first question is, why are we talking about cybersecurity best practices at a CFO conference? By a show of hands, who here has direct oversight over your firm's cybersecurity initiatives? Okay, so that's maybe half, 40%. John,
yeah.
Brandon, what's your experience with that? CFO's duties relating to cybersecurity.
So, from my perspective, this is legitimately like the smartest room in the smartest group of people I get to sit down with, because CFO has a lot of responsibilities, and unfortunately, under one of those tends to fall cybersecurity and IT, which makes your job really, really challenging. And so this is going to be an opportunity just to kind of talk things out and flush things out from a CFO's perspective and not a technology perspective. I know that technology can be confusing, and because of the confusion brings a little bit of anxiety and the unknown and not knowing what is out there and what's going on. So I think we can just take the time, just a few minutes, and just talk through it and help you understand that it's not as scary as it may be perceived or it may seem. What do you think, Brandon?
Yeah, I'll be honest. the reporting into the CISO, reporting into the CFO, or the CFO having accountability for the security program is newer to me than, say, a CIO, a CTO, something that's more maybe in the IT space. But it makes a lot of sense when you think about it. And as a matter of fact, recruiters, I think, reach out to everyone. The last couple folks who've reached out to me looked at the reporting structure, and it was directly to a CFO. So I think this may be, or at least to my eyes, is becoming more normal. And I think that is probably a good thing, because if you look at a lot of the responsibilities, to John's point, that the CFO has, looking at things like, maybe your internal audit team reporting up through the CFO, enterprise risk management reporting to the CFO. I partner heavily, often, with our CFO, Adrian Lee, and there are a lot of commonalities between the way she sees risk and the way that the security team sees risk. So while in my eyes, it's not something I'm used to, it makes a lot of sense, and just based on some of the more recent events that have come up with folks reaching out to me, and then this conference here, I think it's probably something that is going to be more the norm.
Yeah, I think I appreciate both of those comments. From our perspective, and just maybe to spill the beans a little bit, we did have a chance to talk about some of these questions in the dialogue before, and I think we were all in agreement that the CFO's role and responsibility within IT, cybersecurity, network security protocols is becoming more and more, the CFO is really becoming more and more the gatekeeper of some of those decisions, especially in smaller organizations that may not have a 10-person deep IT security team. But you're going to be looking at setting budgets, identifying main areas of focus for network, the security team, new hires, whatever it might be, purchasing insurance, coordinating breach responses with various service providers, or just even, to Brandon's point, ERP. What happens? What do we do if there is a situation, if there is a breach? Maybe, John, what do you think from? Well, let me put it this way. I guess I'm skipping ahead a little bit. So Utah recently enacted a law back in May of this year, right? HB 80,
right,
that puts a lot of responsibility back on company executives for network security.
right.
Talk to us a little bit about that.
Awesome. So I do want to spend a couple minutes on this. This is really fascinating. The state of Utah really did something very well. You have nationwide, you have a lot of states that are passing legislation that is penalizing companies that don't meet IT security standards. A great example is the CCPA. California pushed this Consumer Protection Act out, and they are levying massive fines on companies who are not found compliant with this. The state of Utah last year enacted, or they proposed a bill, which was HB 80, the cybersecurity bill. It passed unanimously and was signed into law by Governor Cox this past just about 6-8 months ago. The impetus of this bill is amazing, and I want to spend just a couple minutes with you and help you understand the benefits from this. So the state of Utah passed this bill, and what it does is it provides an affirmative defense to all organizations who comply with a nationally recognized framework. Now that seems pretty large, but let's break this down. So let's assume that your organization had a breach of security systems, or a data breach. Following the data breach, you have all the forensics. You have to close it off. Following the data breach are all the lawsuits that follow. For any person that was negatively impacted, they come back and sue the company for exuberant amounts of money. The state of Utah wants to put an end to that, and they passed this bill to provide organizations and businesses in the state of Utah an affirmative defense against all those tort lawsuits. So following a breach, all lawsuits would be thrown out if, and only if, the organization has invested time and energy into cybersecurity before the breach occurred. The benchmark that they put is that the organization is performing risk assessments on a regular basis using nationally recognized framework. Most companies, and when the bill first came out, it was kind of an overshot. It had ISO 27001, it had high trust, SOC, had all these really, really expensive frameworks. But then the working group got together and they put in 2 frameworks which are very low bars of entry: NIST 171 and CIS controls. Those are 2 really, really basic frameworks that I would say any organization can follow. It's not just these massive companies these massive companies that have a large presence in the state of Utah that can afford to comply with these. Any organization can. So this bill is fantastic because the state is encouraging, legislature is encouraging businesses to be prepared and to do everything they can before a breach occurs. And then when it does, the state will step in and back the organizations who have demonstrated the desire and the drive to protect their data. Was that?
That's
Sorry.
perfect. Any questions? I've got a few follow-ups, but
What does that cost
Great.
to perform that type of risk assessment?
So his question was, what does that cost to perform that type of risk assessment? The best part about this is that you and your organization can do this on your own. It doesn't have to be done by a third-party organization. If you were to get with a consulting organization to do this, you're probably right around the $10,000 mark. And that is something that can be carried on into the future. Like, for example, if we're working with an organization, we will give them the framework, and it's up to the IT team to just update it on a regular basis. We go a step further and have our assessment. We work with a privacy attorney who actually will write a letter or an attestation letter stating the fact that the organization on the state was found compliant with that framework. That they can hand over to legal and say, if anything happens, this is in our back pocket. Great question, thank you. Yes?
Sorry, I missed that. I was writing stuff down. Did you mention the names of the two frameworks?
Yes, the two frameworks, well, there's about 6 or 8, but the easiest ones to comply with is NIST, NIST 171, and CIS controls. CIS, it used to be top 20, but it's now CIS top 18. It's changed just about every 3 years.
Yeah.
But that's what's written into the law.
All right, thank you.
Yep. Go ahead.
So if you're using one of those frameworks, what is the consequence again? Do you have a defense against cyber claims?
That's a good question. So his question was, if you're following this framework, do you have a defense against cyber claims? That is not the case. You have an affirmative defense against lawsuits or tort lawsuits that would follow a breach of security systems is how the bill is specifically written. So if there was a breach in your organization, if data was leaked somehow, the lawsuits that follow that incident would get thrown out. You would receive the affirmative defense against those lawsuits. So it's not, let me just take one step. It's not all of the costs and the fees to notify and to rectify the situation or to the forensics and closing that door. None of that is covered, but all the lawsuits that would come in after the fact would be thrown out in the state of the state of Utah. You know, in working with your attorney and your legal group, it is very wise to put in there contractual agreements that any lawsuits that would follow would be in the state of Utah. Even if they are suing you from Florida, just making sure that it's here in the state of Utah, because then you would fall under this HB 80 affirmative defense.
So, you know, as an example, from what John's talking about, you've all heard of T-Mobile, right? Anybody see what happened to T-Mobile in the last 30 days?
Yeah.
T-Mobile had another data breach. Not a data breach, but another data breach, right? To the point that you now have state and federal regulators that are now investigating T-Mobile and their executive teams on what information was leaked, or not, maybe not leaked, but lost, infiltrated. Why wasn't it protected? You've had this situation happen before in the past. Why haven't you protected it? They're going to have to spend millions of dollars in defending themselves and justifying their position. They may not have a good justification for it. However, you take that into a Utah state court, and that if you've followed one of the basic frameworks, that type of regulatory investigation goes away. And that can be a very expensive part of a post-breach incident response cost, if that makes sense.
Can I jump in one more time?
Absolutely.
Sorry. So, as I said, Utah did it right. They're trying to incentivize with a carrot instead of a stick. Mm-hmm. They're trying to get away from what California, Virginia, other states are trying to follow suit in. And it's awesome to see other states saw what Utah did and are trying to follow as well, because they see the benefit of what Utah is doing. Utah wants businesses to be up and running and doing what they do best. And the best way to do that is to, A, do some preventative work. You know, we're the state of the honeybees. You know, we work. We want to be doing what we are doing. And it's from my personal opinion that this is a very, very wise thing to do, to incentivize organizations to spend minimal amounts. And it's funny that an insurance guy is sitting next to me, and I'm talking about this because this is for your organizations. As a CFO, this is directly in your line of responsibilities to make sure that invest small amounts of money, invest the small amount of time to make sure that you comply with these frameworks. You know, PCI is one of the frameworks. HIPAA is another framework. There's a bunch of frameworks that would fit with your organizations. Like I said, there are 6. I think there's 7 maybe. But just find the one that works the best. The 2 easiest, I said, were NIST 171 and CIS controls. Do we have any other questions about this before we continue to move on?
If you're a multi-state company,
Mm-hmm.
so you can enact this, and then everything, you know, from a legal standpoint flows through Utah, then?
So, yeah, so his question was, if you do this and you follow this framework in your multi-state organization or even a multinational organization, and you make sure that your contracts flow into the state of Utah, would it protect you? And the answer is yes. And if you have your nexus, if you have in your agreements that all lawsuits would come back to the state of Utah, then yes, that would.
Yeah, the key is choice of law. Where are you going to adjudicate any disputes? You know, to maybe make another analogy, again, from the insurance world, as the CFOs in the room, you're making decisions about healthcare and the medical insurance that you're providing or purchasing for your organizations. What has been the trend with medical insurance besides increasing almost unceasing increases in your premiums? It's wellness, right? You're incentivized to take certain precautions. If you maybe have mild hypertension, maybe you go have preventative care on that, or maybe you exercise a little bit more, whatever it might be. They want you to get your pre-screenings every year. What's your A1C? All this fun stuff. That's the type of thing that we're talking about here. Using a carrot instead of a stick help to motivate you to increase your cyber wellness or your network security wellness.
Regan, and
yeah.
just real quick on that, it's actually mentioned quite a bit in the bill, is reasonable security. Reasonable
Thank you.
security. So when we're talking about investing a little bit of time, or you know, how mature does the program need to be, there's some wiggle room there on what reasonable means, and it'll probably may take settled law to kind of flesh that out. But reasonable, I think, could be argued defensively pretty well. I think it's well worded.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and so that's what my question for you, Brandon, was going to be. You know, as a multi-state organization, you have a little bit of sales outside of the United States, not a lot,
Right.
but John mentioned 2 very high-profile legislative changes. One was GDPR, which is coming out of the EU, General Data Protection Regulations, but then CCPA, the California Consumer Protection Act, which you guys have to deal with quite a bit.
Right.
And for everyone's benefit, these are vastly different types of regulations and laws. CCPA really focuses more on PII, personally identifiable information protections, the right to be forgotten, if you've heard of that. If I'm doing business with a company that is based in California or has California exposures, or if I'm a California resident, I can tell that company, I want you to send me all the information that you have on me, and I want you to destroy it. I want you to forget me as a person, like you delete my digital footprint. How have you guys had to morph and react to that?
So it's been interesting because if you look at GDPR, the citizens are more, when they register for an account, let's say there's an Overstock UK, whatever it is, when they register for an account, they don't opt in to, or excuse me, they're opted into privacy. So they are not included in a lot of these customer data sends that we oftentimes see or hear about here, and as a result of a breach, that's the way that we're identified about them. In the U.S., however, our citizens, somebody signs up for an account at overstock.com, for example, you have to basically opt out of everything. So you're automatically opted in. So we kind of had to shift gears. We started with GDPR, moved over to CCPA. CCPA is now going to a CPRA, I believe, going forward. There's some changes and adjustments there. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of effort, especially for a 20-year-old organization where there's a lot of, we've got a monolithic application, a lot of tech debt built in, a lot of data goes everywhere. So what this really forced us to do, well, we really originally focused on, hey, credit cards are the crown jewels. You look at personally identifiable information now, that's on the dark market trading for as much or more than credit cards now.
True.
So we kind of had to shift our thinking into saying, all right, this PII or we call it high business impact data, we need to be securing just as well as we do credit cards. So we've looked at obviously, different risk ways to manage that risk, right? Do we mitigate it by not doing anything about it? Do we transfer it to somebody with tokenization? This has spurred a lot of internal conversation. But if we look at even just within so those are the dichotomy between the UK or Europe and the US. But if you just look at the individual states now, with, I think Virginia is actually getting ready to release something similar to HB 80, but they've got the VCDPA, the Virginia Consumer Data Privacy Act, which is a 180 from California. It's much less restrictive, it's more open. They're very much like Utah in that they want to bring businesses in, and I think this is how we're going to see states trying to do exactly that, bring organizations, big companies in by making some of these changes in law that makes it more business friendly. Thank you for helping me out there. More business friendly. I think we'll see a lot more of that. I think California is kind of getting, and you can see the organizations moving out of California to Texas, Tesla, there have been a couple others. So that's another thing that we have to consider as well, is we have to say, all right, California considers this data the most important, or this is what they consider PII. That's the one we have to adhere to.
Right. We had a question in the back, sorry.
Yeah, the question is, many of us have insurance brokers, people who work in other states, correct? And then we go out for cybersecurity insurance. Is there a way to direct them towards Utah law, or if you're getting quotes for cybersecurity insurance within the state of Utah, are the rates for cybersecurity insurance here dropping?
So let me recap that, and I'm going to kick
Yeah.
that over to you. Is that all right? So his question was, if you are getting cybersecurity insurance, and if you're getting cybersecurity insurance for out of the state of Utah, can you direct claims to Utah, and can that decrease your premiums for cybersecurity insurance? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's a great question, and this goes back to what John was talking about with similarly to pointing the choice of law or the legal forum in your contracts, pointing that back to Utah. If you have that in your contracts, there's a justification that can be made to the underwriters with your policies to also have the choice of law for the policies domiciled in Utah. Doesn't happen often. Not necessarily. You might not have depending on obviously size of premium or the structure of the program, they might default to New York. They might default to a different domicile. However, if there's a case that can be made to focus the choice of law in the policy as well, so that all disputes with the insurer must be handled in the state of Utah as well, that's something that is absolutely should be looked at. From a rating perspective based on jurisdiction, not so much. There used to be a lot of concern and consternation about, well, are you operating in the EU? Do you have exposure to GDPR? Because, and I'm going to go down a rabbit hole here, so hopefully you guys all stay awake. I'll check in with you a little bit here.
Buckle up.
Buckle up, right? So when you look at a cyber insurance policy, what constitutes a claim? Historically, a claim was some sort of an event or an incident. We don't use the term breach because that's a legally defined term that if you've had an incident, we don't know if it's a breach yet or not, but you've had something. That's what will typically trigger a response, and it's if somebody is in your network that shouldn't be there, if data is taken and stolen by someone that shouldn't have had access to it. Those typically, when we're talking cyber-related issues, it could be just network downtime caused by an intrusion, could be caused by an outage with a third-party service provider. All the things that could potentially trigger a claim. Historically, a privacy matter where somebody just says, I'm outside of a regulatory compliance from a privacy and data perspective with GDPR or with CCPA, used to not trigger coverage. So we were on the forefront. I'll give credit to John, who's in the back, one of my colleagues, and a few of my other teammates that said, we need to help draft endorsements onto these policies that allow coverage to be triggered if it's just a regulatory breach. No one's been damaged, but now you have regulators that are coming in and performing an audit, an internal audit. Do you have these protocols? Do you have these scenarios factored for in your emergency response plan? If the answer is no, you could be facing a fine or a penalty. Cyber insurance is one of the few insurers that will cover fines and penalties if coverage is triggered. So that's one thing where we had to go back and look at it and say, okay, let's provide coverage for the regulatory related claims, if that makes sense, or triggers is probably the better word.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that?
Yeah.
Which I think a lot of people in the room, I know this HB 80 is new, and I know it's only here domiciled, I like that word, in the state of Utah. But is there anything that you and your team with insurance could do to decrease monthly premiums for cybersecurity, for cyber policies, if they were found compliant within the state of Utah and were able to comply with the law?
And that's a great point. I kind of feel like that might have been a softball question.
No, I'm actually trying to be honest with you
Okay.
because I don't know if it's even possible right now because it's so new.
The way that I would answer that is yes, because it goes back to if you have certain frameworks, that is going to be viewed as favorable to underwriters, right? If you have certain things like, and we'll talk about this maybe a little bit later, but multi-factor authentication, people are talking about that all the time, right? If you are requiring employees, if you've disabled remote desktop, if you've required employees that are logging onto your network to utilize some sort of multi-factor authentication or dual authentication, which is really, I know something, which is my password, but then I also have something, like my phone, that I get a text message to, or I have an app on that phone that is encrypted that I'm required, that I have to use biometric, like Face ID or whatever it might be, to unlock the app that then tells Microsoft that, yes, that's really me logging in. If you have EDR software, endpoint detection and response software, like a SentinelOne or a CrowdStrike, something that's monitoring your network for intrusion detection, and then also quarantining anything that isn't on an approved list, this is all part of that framework. If you're doing things like that, insurers will look at that favorably, and then yes, it might be a lower premium, or it might be the difference in whether or not you have insurance in general. And that's where things are kind of shifting. We can talk a little bit more about that. But I don't know, does that help?
Yeah,
Or does
that makes
answer
sense.
your question?
So you're saying the investment in cybersecurity is actually not only just for the HB 80, but potentially for insurance as well. You could get a lower deductible. You can get
Yes, and it can, again, be the difference maker between whether or not you're getting coverage. I think one thing that we tell our clients is, by the time you spend $1 on insurance within the cyberspace or cyber arena, you should have spent $9 on the affirmative preventative measures, right?
Makes sense.
Again, going back to that health insurance analogy, if you're eating right, doing at least 30 minutes of exercise a week or whatever it might be, I don't know what the...
going to the dentist, losing weight,
Yes.
no more happiness.
This is true. Just rip all the joy out of my life,
Yes.
right? Yeah. So I hope this has been a good conversation. I want to segue a little bit because I think we've clearly established that the CFO has responsibilities. I don't want to use the word culpability, but there should be a heavy interest and focus for each of you in your organizations on what you're doing from a cyber perspective, especially to achieve this affirmative defense that we talked about. Let's shift gears a little bit to say, okay, now that we've talked about HB 180, what is that affirmative defense? What are these best practices without going into the NIST framework or the CIS framework or one of the multiple different options that we could look at? Brandon, maybe can you share with us your philosophy at Overstock? What are these best practices? What do they look like? What are you guys doing?
Yeah, so I know Regan said we're not going to talk about any of the control frameworks. I've kind of got to here because they are so good.
Don't get nerdy, man.
We will start with Overstock Security Program was, I kid you not, built on CIS security. We've since kind of transitioned over to NIST 853, potentially looking at something like a COBIT or ISO in the future, but we started with CIS way back in the day. And when we start talking about, all right, how do you start to secure your environment? It's like building a house, right? So how many folks have seen when they're building a house, the foundation is getting dug up. Everybody, there's a lot of construction going on. That effort takes 8 months for whatever reason to dig a hole. And then all of a sudden you wake up the next morning and it's been framed. It just kind of happens overnight is what it seems like compared to them actually getting the structural integrity of what the home will be set up. And that's kind of how we approached, and I think is a good way to approach the security of your organization, right, is building that foundation. It takes time. And it kind of starts with understanding what you have in your environment. What assets do you have? What assets can you manage, whether they be on premise, in a data center, co-location, or in the cloud? The only way we're going to secure them is if we know about them. So it really comes down to first knowing what we've got, both from a software and hardware perspective. Some of those efforts can be challenging. I'll be honest with you, I have seen some smaller organizations that I've worked with during my time at Overstock that really fall down on that. And you would think it would be so much easier, right? These guys only have maybe 1,000 endpoints or nodes, but it seems to be a real struggle or challenge, especially, more often than not, it might be managed in a spreadsheet. And that's great. Do whatever works, but just make sure you get it. You've got a process to say, all right, as part of procurement, something comes in, we're tracking it, we know about it, we can get it into our CMDB if you have one, update, give it everything it needs from there. And then software is another big one as well, right? Making sure that obviously the software is patched, knowing what the assets are, knowing what's on those assets, and getting those things cleaned up. Regan mentioned multi-factor authentication. I think if we've seen anything over the past 18 months, he also mentioned RDP. A lot of the folks who are attacking organizations know that organizations likely weren't set up for remote work. So maybe they didn't have VPNs or other alternative ways to provide remote services. So what have they done? They've opened some of the easier remote management tools to their home workers so they can get access to a server or a workstation in the environment or to do management. When they open those things up, sometimes those services aren't the most secure. Sometimes they're open in a manner that doesn't really take advantage of some of the security controls you might be able to put on, let's say, a load balancer or a firewall. I won't get too technical.
Don't go down that hole, man.
But they don't enact some things that are really easy to kind of put in place, but maybe an organization just doesn't know about it, or they think it's more effort than it really is. So securing those services, and by having those services allowed, which if you need them, you've got to have them, having them set up for some type of multi-factor or step-up authentication is critical. So when we're looking at not allowing access to the environment, but we still need to unknowns, but we still need to allow to our knowns, how do we do that? We make sure that a username and password, nobody reuses them, right? Everybody has got a separate username and password for every website you log into.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Without a question.
So where there are I'm using my same password at Overstock, wherever, and it's the same username, which is an email, username and password that I'm using for my Hotmail account, right? That's going to be a problem. That multi-factor really, it doesn't eliminate the risk, but it really mitigates the risk. There's a lot of effort that these threat actors need to kind of go through to circumvent that. So those are the foundation, if you will, to the security program. So when you start looking at machine learning and AI that come, through all of these other technologies, I don't want to say it's for the security 1%. I think everybody can get there. But if you're just focusing on building it up, and even if you're not building a security program, making sure that is as solid as it can be, it really does buy you a lot from a protective standpoint.
Can I jump in really quickly?
Oh, yeah.
Because I need this to be deciphered, what he just said, to you guys very clearly. Because there's some really, really good and aggressive salesmen out there that are selling these flashy new objects that he was just talking about with AI and machine learning and all these things. Let's make this very simple for a CFO. A CFO needs to know what is going on in their infrastructure. IT already knows what's going on. The way that you can hold your IT team accountable is by what he was saying with building a house. you need to start at the ground level. You need to dig the foundation. How can a CFO hold an IT director accountable? By performing a risk assessment and prioritizing risk. Because IT will come to you with these flashy new awesome SentinelOne, they're really good, but they're expensive. And I will tell you personally that your money is not going to be well spent if you're getting these really complex hardware, software packages when you are not doing the basics. So do a risk assessment internally. Understand your risk, prioritize the risk, and invest money into your highest risk, lowest cost solutions. Yeah. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. I would also add, I know no one in this room has done this before, but sometimes I've seen organizations spend a lot of money to bring something in and the organization isn't ready for it. They're not at a maturity level to take advantage of it. So to John's point, when those teams come to us and say, or to you, and say, hey, this is what we need, this is why, if you don't get the sense or you can't ask the questions that kind of start with how you have built your security program, or asking a simple question such as, all right, are we sure this is going to be, if it's something that needs to go on a computer, on an endpoint, all right, do we know where all of the endpoints are? Really starting at the foundation and asking some of those questions before we even get to what it's actually going to provide, if it even is implemented, right? Doesn't become shelfware somewhere, but making sure that everything is in place, foundation is built, and we've got some of the structure up. It's framed to a certain degree. Yeah. Now we're looking at putting in the insulation, the sheetrock, the shingles. Where does this fit? It doesn't make sense to put on the shingles if we haven't done any of the sheetrock.
Good job, Ryan.
Yeah, I think that's very insightful. So maybe two points here. A lot of the services and resources that we talk about on that foundational level, if you're using, say, Microsoft, there are a lot of resources within Microsoft, like turning on their firewall, for example, that has an active directory of new and emerging threats, right? Who's heard of, what is it, Update Tuesday or whatever it is?
Patch Tuesday.
Patch Tuesday. What is it, the third Tuesday of every month, right? Like Microsoft rolls out their patches. If you're doing active patch management and you're requiring everyone in your computer or in your environment to update their computer once a month, you can block out a lot of the issues. That doesn't cost anything, right? And there's things that you can just turn on quickly, including MFA,
yes,
and download the free Microsoft Authenticator app on everyone's phones or devices that now all of a sudden you've got that, and you haven't spent a lot of money. Sure, there's going to be time. You're going to have to train people on how to do this, but that's there.
Yeah.
And even looking at just a real-time cloud-based backup service, which doesn't cost a lot, those are some simple things that can kind of really help protect. But one of the things that, we kind of talk, or in password management too, right? Like requiring every 30 days, you have to update your password. It's a pain in the butt. I personally hate it.
Yep.
I absolutely hate it because it's like, okay, what number am I adding on to my normal password at the very end, right? Like, okay, now I'm up to 99. Now I have to go to 100 and add another digit, right? But the reality is, some of that boils down to employees, right? So your greatest asset in a lot of your businesses are your people, but they can also be your weakest link. So we talk about password management. We talk about, what employees can and can't do. John, you guys do this all the time with risk assessments, penetration testing.
Yeah.
Who here's done a penetration test at their business? Okay, a handful. Talk to us about some of those fun stories.
Okay. So I wanted to do two things really quickly. You did a great job of talking about taking care of the basic things and understanding your risk. That is what HB 80 is doing. Those frameworks are talking about everything he just said. Are you downloading these free softwares? As a Utah business, as a Utah consultant, we are trying to find the most cost-effective solutions and recommending those to people we work with. That is critical. And making sure, legitimately, it's just turning on software to make it work. Penetration testing is actually kind of funny because it's like one of these buzzwords that everyone knows about, but they don't know what really it is. I spend most of my day trying to talk companies out of pen tests because they don't know what it is and they don't know what it really provides. We try and get everyone to do more of a risk assessment. Within a risk assessment, we'll ask the question, do you do pen tests? But we'll also ask, are you enabling MFA? Are you doing all the basic things that need to be done before you're investing money into a pen test? Going to your perspective on pen tests, they're kind of fun. It's kind of the sexy part of IT security where we can go in and physically break into an office and take pictures of ourselves in a vault, walking freely in organizations, just because we simply name dropped. Hey, Bill said that we would need to install this into the server room. Can you get us access in the server room? Oh, sure. Bill said that. Great. LinkedIn tells us who Bill is and where he works and his role. And it's just the simple trust factor. They're fun. They're great. But again, it's not the top priority. It's not what everyone needs to go out and run out and get a pen test. It's one of those medium risk things that you need to do. It should be done, but there's higher risk things that should be done. Would you agree with that?
I would also add,
Yeah.
going back to email and
Yes.
specifically penetration testing, I can honestly say this, within the last, we had the readout call
Oh, no.
Thursday or Friday.
You do that?
Oh, yeah, we do pen tests.
But you do readout calls of who failed?
No. So this was with the company that came in and performed the assessment. One of the first things they did was what John's talking about, social engineer. Only this social engineer was via phish. To Regan's point, all right, we want our employees, they're the biggest asset in the company. How can they also be an asset to the security organization? So you guys run phishing campaigns. I have to assume some folks in here do. Phishing campaigns from your IT team. They send out an email and, if you click on it, it pops up a just-in-time training. Hey, this was a phish. Have you guys not seen these?
Yeah.
Okay, a couple of you. Okay, so phishing, an internal phishing campaign. User awareness or associate awareness is basically what that is. So, as part of this pen test, firm went out, found a bunch of email addresses, emailed to a lot of the high-value targets in the organization. Hey, this is what we need. 25% of those individuals who were emailed clicked on that, hey, I think this is a phish, which generates something for security. Security was already looking into something else because someone had clicked the link that they had sent and done some things. But so security's looking at it on the technical side. 25% of those, I think it was roughly 20 or so folks who had clicked the phishing link, correlated the two, had the pen test team's infrastructure burned down within 2 hours.
Wow.
And if you look at a lot of these organizations, when they're compromised, there's a mean time to detect of months, right? I think it's 73 days was one of the most recent, Verizon, I think it was. Mm-hmm. So users, associates, yes, use them as part of your detective capabilities within an organization, and it starts with awareness.
Yeah, I think that's great. To the extent that you can train employees to maybe trust but verify, look at the email. If something looks amiss, it probably is. Very closely look at an email address, for example. Somebody might be spoofing someone within your organization, replacing an I with an L, a lowercase l, or something as simple as that a quick review you wouldn't notice necessarily with just visual cues. Sometimes you hover over the name that it says who the sender's from, and it's a completely different address. Or if there's an attachment that you're not expecting, what is this? There have been times where I've received emails from clients with attached to a Google Doc that says, hey, we want you to look at this. And I'm like thinking, okay, well, I'm not expecting this from this customer. We're not doing their insurance renewal right now. So what is this? So I email back, hey, Terry, is this, you sent this to me, am I supposed to have this? I get a response back that says, yes, that's for you to review. Number one, Terry doesn't respond to me within 5 minutes. And two, that's just a very short response. So I called the couple of colleagues that I work with that were copied on that email. I said, hey, don't open that yet. I get on the phone and I call Terry. Terry, did you send me an email? No. My email's been compromised. I haven't had access to my email for 2 days. Okay, let's get rid of that. Because I don't know what was in that Google Doc.
Yeah.
I don't want to know what was in that
that's
Google
terrible.
Doc. But that could have, and of course, I'm getting this on my phone while I'm standing in line for rides at Disneyland with my kids. Like, how am I going to justify that to my organization? Like, I was just clicking through stuff, right? The other and I don't know if this is a true statistic. I'd like to see if this is true or not, but I do know of a case where they did the email phishing campaign. There was a Chick-fil-A that was opening up right around the corner from this office, and it said, click here for your free coupon for a free Chick-fil-A sandwich. The CEO of the company knew that this campaign was going on, and he was one of the first people to click on the coupon link.
So we just completed 2 phishing tests in the last 10 days, and 25 to 30% failure rate. And we were able to get username, password, credentials into the organization. 20% of the employees gave us username and password credentials. Like it's unreal. If you just give them a link to put in their credentials, they'll do it. Yeah. If an email looks like it's coming from IT.
Yeah, I got an email from IT a couple weeks ago like, hey, I can't remember what it was, but I'm like, I'm not trusting this. So I go into the corporate directory. I'm like, do I know Dan? Well, I see a picture here. I call them. Yeah. That's the type of training that you want to do with some of your employees, that trust but verify. And the same is true from a payments standpoint. Before you send any money out or any payment information is changed, pick up the phone, call a trusted person, not just a help desk, but someone you know at that organization to make sure you're sending it in the right place.
Wow, we're out of time, my friend.
We are out of time, and we're way over time.
Do you guys have any questions? Any burning questions? Sorry.
We could keep going. We'll be here for a while if you do have other questions, but I'd like to thank both John and Brandon for taking the time out of their busy schedules to be here, and appreciate you guys imparting your knowledge with us. This is
Thank you.
great.
Thanks for
Thank
coming,
you.
really.
Thank you. Give him a hand.
Yeah, you're awesome, man.
Oh, thanks, man. No, I don't know about that.
No, I'm really impressed with your organization.
Got